What Da Vinci tried to do at 80, I did at 6 years old because I had been working on it perhaps from a past life. The Euclidean mindset has kept us so locked away. Like there's tons of paperwork of Da Vinci working on the flower of life and trying to unravel it.
Terrance Howard mentioned something about an ancient discovery called the flower of life, which represents one of the oldest images we have.
The oldest images that we have from antiquity and found on every continent is this image where 64 circles are overlapped, and it's called the flower of life. And on every continent it was found, in whatever language, it was always called the flower of life.
Made 6,000 years ago, messes with us because we can't draw a straight line in it. Can we really understand these old shapes, or are we clueless?
Well, 6,000 years ago, or however long ago, someone had the clever idea of saying, you know what, why don't I draw straight lines where the circles overlap?
He questions the use of straight lines in constructing Platonic solids, arguing that energy in the universe is expressed through curved waves due to the principle of equal and opposite reactions.
If they began to average the space where the circles overlap, so that tetrahedron that we see, because we know that there are no straight lines because all energy has an equal and opposite. Let's pause it for a second, just so I can repeat that. All energy is expressed in motion, all motion expressed in waves, and all waves are curved. Therefore, it is impossible to create a straight line because every action has the equal and opposite reaction, and the greater that reaction.
Terrance found math problems that arise from creating straight lines where there are none. Let's see his explanation.
The greater the resistance and the greater that curvature. This curvature is the equanimity of all the interactions within a particular system. It all balances out into these perfect spheres, which are magnetic fields around each other, which is a discharging aspect. And where these magnetic fields interact, this is where electricity begins. Where they overlap, they're forced to create spin. But 6,000 years ago, they said they're going to average the spin, and these toroidals happening, and they generated straight lines and approximated where the energy goes, so you can keep playing it. And now you can clearly see that even the cube, where we get Pythagorean theorem from, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, is an average. It's an approximation. All of these problems arose from them creating straight lines where there were no straight lines. And this has been called, the greatest discovery, basically, in geometry.
Energy's all about that never-ending cycle. Acting? Yeah, it was fun. But physics? That's where Terrance found his spiritual groove. Now he's cooking up these fresh wave and tear mixes, waving goodbye to the old-school Euclidean scene.
And for mathematics.
And that's the Platonic solids you're speaking about.
The Platonic solids are averages. Euclid went to Egypt and pulled these things and wrote them down, and everyone took credit for them, but they took credit for some falsehoods. So they've watched it go through, and it'll go through the dodecahedron. So what I decided to do, what I was instructed to do, was to take the same flower.
You may think you've been here for 20 years on this planet, but we know that energy, it is forever. It continually recycles itself. So you know that you've been a trilobite 350 million years ago, or some part of it. Some parts of you were part of a pterodactyl. Every one of us have been a part of everything in this universe. So if we tap into those things in ourselves and remember those things in ourselves, we have that power. Now, my vocation has been an actor, and I've loved that. I've been able to take care of my family as an actor, but that's never been my passion. I was an actor because it was like Jesus walking on water for tips, because he could do it. That's what he did. It was a natural thing for him. I've always been an empath. I've always been emotionally connected to everything. But the thing that I was most spiritually connected to, that was my driving force, was physics. It was wondering how the universe really came to be. And I might get about talking about this right now, but I've got a book coming out called Does a dollar times a dollar equal a dollar, or does a dollar times a dollar equal $2? And in the process, not only do I explain the depth of the Platonic solids, but I also introduce the new Terran wave conjugations that replace this Euclidean way of life and gives us a three-dimensional way of seeing the world. That's what I'm saying. Do you want to see the world in 2D or do you want to see it in 3D? How do you have time to really bring yourself back to who you are? Because that's the most important thing. That's the thing that's going to bother you more than anything else. You will look at yourself one day and you won't know who you are because you don't remember who you were. You know, sometime along the way, or maybe at 13 or 14, we let go of the little person that kept us going.
The flower of life, said to be the oldest symbol ever, dates back 6,000 years. Da Vinci and Newton, they were obsessed, spending their lives trying to figure it out.
I want you guys to know about a 6,000-year-old secret. 6,000 years, mankind has been trying to decipher this one little thing called the flower of life. Now, do you know the flower of life? Have you guys ever seen this before? Now, you know this is one of the oldest symbols in human history, right? Or do you not know? This symbol was found in the Temple of Osiris in Egypt, and it had been molecularly burned into the wall. And it's 6,000 years old. This same symbol has been found in the forbidden temples in China, sitting under the fufu dogs, and the foot on it, the flower of life, saying whoever controlled that flower of life controlled the universe. There were secrets in that flower of life that Da Vinci spent his whole life trying to uncover. There were secrets in that flower of life that Newton spent his whole life in secret trying to uncover. The same secrets that Pythagoras was desperately trying to uncover. But their problem was they kept seeing this in a two-dimensional space. They couldn't get it out of this two-dimensional frame, and as a result, they got stuck in this plane, a flat plane. Now, what Da Vinci and all of them wanted to do, they were trying to find a way to bring this flower to life, because what is inside of it? Well, apparently, there were secrets inside of it, shapes.
Nature doesn't follow straight lines, and Terrance proved it with the space between Earth and the Moon. Have we been blinded by our stubborn adherence to tradition? Or are we ready to shake things up with a new perspective?
And all of those other things out of it. But they were misled by something I think called a straight line. You guys believe in straight lines? You believe there's straight lines in the universe? Well, let me hit you with something. All energy in the universe is expressed in what? It's in motion. If something is still, there's no energy. Kinetic, right? All motion is expressed in what? You look at galaxies, are they expressed in straight lines? Expressed in vortices. All vortices are expressed in what? Waves. All waves are curved. Show me a straight line in nature. You show me where the Platonic solids come from. Where do they have their foundations in our universe? Are there any straight lines? If you look at anything, there are no straight lines. That's been the mistake. We've been looking at these straight lines, this Euclidean way of thinking, and missing the curvature of nature. So here we are, back with the curvature of nature. And you have all these little pieces. Now, this has always been an information system. So compare some of these points. Take a point here and say, well, what's the space in between all of these things? Now, they've said that all the in-between spaces, if this is the Earth and this is the moon right here, all this in-between space is filled with what? A void. There's nothing in the void. Well, I found that there is something in the void. The elementary fundamental particles that they've been searching for at the CERN Collider, the Hadron Collider in CERN, I found that their energy signatures matched perfectly to some of the pieces that I was able to pull out of here. The idea of like one of the things I've been saying, the Euclidean mindset has kept us so locked away. Like there's tons of paperwork of Da Vinci working on the flower of life and trying to unravel it. But every single existence, every single example, you see him making straight lines and trying to make these straight lines bend in, and therefore he was never able to open it up. Because the universe is curved, all space is curved. And as a result, what I was doing in trying to find these straight lines, I abandoned the idea of the straight line. The shortest distance between 2 points is curved space, because you cannot force your way straight through space. Even electricity, as it moves from a southern plane to a northern plane, it always goes northeast in its direction. And magnetism, as it expands out, it goes southwesterly. And that's the spin. That's how you always know whether it's magnetism or electricity. It's the spin. Is it northeast or is it southwest? But in trying to define curved matter, I'm so sorry, I get so distracted. Trying to define the spaces, it allowed me to see that all of these in between, what we have been dealing with is these petals. All of mankind have dealt with these petals, but it's these other shapes that we've ignored constantly. Well, those other shapes were the in-between spaces. They were the things that filled up the vacuum of space. And all these particles that I have, I think are the full proof of that. And it is also the full proof of the wave particle argument.
Terrance Howard says it's all about chemical reactions. He wonders why every bubble we blow turns into a circle.
Everything is based on chemical reactions. In order for me to become a character, I have to change my chemical composition of how I'm thinking, and as a result, that changes how I position myself, which changes how the heat is generated and transferred out in and out of my body. Everything comes down to chemistry. You know, so acting in physics, in physics, when two things are drawn to each other, it's because they are of similar charge. It's not positive, because they say negatives attract. But cold air drops down. Does it attract to the hot air rising up? No, it passes right by each other. Because negatives, opposites don't attract, it's positives that attract to each other. Two positives drawn to each other, two negatives discharge each other. So it's all about physics to me. It's all about chemistry, and it's how the physics, how another actor is relating to me. A slight change in his body language changes my tone. It's all physics. And I came out and I was born. The first thing I thought about when I was 5 years old, I was obsessed with bubbles. I was like, why does a bubble take the shape of a ball? Why not a square or a triangle? And I would go and try and make square or triangular bubbles. And you could never do it, because it turns out everything expands as a sphere and everything contracts in geometric form. You drop a pebble into the pond, it expands in a perfect sphere unless there's something in the way. The moment it hits the edge of the shore and starts to come back, it's the contracting waves that hit the expanding waves that creates the initial geometries. Everything expands as a sphere, everything contracts in geometry and fits, basically. So what I'm saying, and what I tried to tell you guys earlier, this is not your first time, it's not your first rodeo, and it won't be your last rodeo. Don't panic in this life. You can actually, there's no sense of everything goes to sleep and it wakes back up again. Refolds and unfolds, refolds and unfolds. And if you're wise, if you're careful, because you can remember conscious moments in your life, can't you? You can remember moments when you're like, wait a minute, I'm in a bigger space than just this little body right here. You become fully aware of everything around you. And if you quiet yourself, you can think about those things. Well, apparently I did that at the last passage, because when I came into this life, I woke up, remember, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. And the first thing I did was work out the flower of life. When I was 6 years old, I started making these pieces.
Terrance Howard credits his research breakthroughs to energy from his past life. Are we just carrying echoes from before, or is there something more to it?
What Da Vinci tried to do at 80, I did at 6 years old because I had been working on it perhaps from a past life. Now, I'm not trying to say I'm crazy or there's reincarnation or anything, but we know that energy does not Energy just reboots itself. So we are eternal. So stop panicking, thinking your life is over. You've done this trillions of times. You'll get good at it and we'll be perfect one time if we get conscious. But we have to get conscious. Because I can either say I'm the smartest man in the world, that I figured out what nobody else in the world could figure out. With Aristotle, with Plato, Pythagoras, all of them tried to figure this out, but I know I am not smarter than these men. So I know that there's something to the consciousness of carrying things through, because the information and the knowledge that I have, I didn't go to school. I had a 1.6 grade point average graduating from high school because I had other things to do. But this information kind of educated me along the way because I was born into it. And now I have the pieces to follow it, and hopefully Chris and maybe Oxford and will do some of the vetting for these things, and we can change the world. But if not, I'll keep doing it, and I'll do it in the next lifetime. If not this one, and the next lifetime after that. Just remember, and another thing, don't forget, you go from positive to negative, everything polarizes positive to negative, then more than likely, with each lifetime, male to female, male to female. If the universe is consistent. I think it is.
Terrance Howard throws shade at traditional math on elementary particles, insisting it needs a serious reboot.
What I've done is I've figured out about 7 different elementary particles, fundamental particles. And then there were secondary generational particles that seem to occur. And when these things began to build up more and more, they began to create their own systems. And these systems is what I brought to Oxford because I would like for you guys to examine them, put them to test. Because I bet you will find all the fundamental particles that they've been looking for in the unified theory of the universe. It's a big statement, but I've got a lot of stuff to back it up if given the opportunity to do so. But the flower of life has been opened, and when we get an opportunity, I'd love to show you some of these things. Can I go on?
Yep, you good?
Mm-hmm. I can't, without being able to show the pieces, it's a whole different monster. But all of these wave conjugations, all of these states of matter, all of these things, it's time for that to be changed now. We have changed all of our buildings to be aerodynamic. Our airplanes are no longer based on a two-dimensional Euclidean way of life, but our math is still based on a two-dimensional way. And I think in order for us to reach the future, we have to examine that. Do you guys know about loops in math? Do you believe in loops? Do you know the square root of 2? Do you think that's a loop? Any other number that above 2, that you put in and you cube and you cube and square and divide by 2, by the 6th operation, it has moved into an exponential number that you can't even imagine. Any number below 2 that you do that same operation with, it will go into an exponentially small matter and number. This is what we call a loop. It is illogical, it doesn't make sense, and it does not make math make sense. So these are some things that I'm bringing to the fore and that I would like to question. I would like to audit the math, the world of mathematics, and I would like to audit how we view the Platonic solids, because I think the new wave conjugations will tell a better story of how our world works.
Our currency system's flawed by greed, so it's time to recheck math and physics basics. But are we willing to fix the mess greed made, or just keep going the same way?
And our system of exchanging with currency is flawed because of greed. There's not like if 1 times 1 equals 2, we've got an equilibrium of balance. 1 times 1 equals 1, you've got loss. When 1 times 1 equals 3 or more, you're talking about over unity and supersymmetry. And that's how you get the universe to work for you. Instead of using just the solar voltaics off of it, you also use the piezoelectric effects of it. You use other things to make greater unity. But 1 times 1 equaling 1, when it could also equal a pound times a pound equaling a pound, when it could also equal $4 or $10 or $100, Does that make sense to you? Do you think the banks are abusing that? What's a quarter times a quarter? If I ask anybody in this room, what's a quarter times a quarter? That's 25 times 25. The computer will the calculator will tell you it's 6.25 cents. But we know 25 pence times 25 pence is 625 pence. That's 6 pounds and 25 pence, but the computer or the banks only have to give you 6 1/4 cents reference for it. Or let's say you put a dime times a dime. Let me get this out. Say you pay a dime times a dime. You put that in your calculator, it says 1 cent. 0.10 times 0.10 is 1 cent. But we know a dime times a dime is a whole dollar. But the banks gives us money based on that evaluation. Is that fair? And this is all legal. Do you think it's not happening in the banks? This is what 1 times 1 equaling 1 has got us. This inconsistency of our monies and our economy is sitting in the balance. And the rest of our future is sitting in the balance because our science has been stunted as a result of the problems in mathematics, because math asks for the basic laws of physics to break down in order for 1 times 1 to equal 1. In order for 1 times 0 to equal nothing, laws of conservation of energy has to disappear. And math is the foundating laws of math is supposed to support the laws of physics. They are arm in arm. They cannot be in controversy with each other. So we need an audit on the Platonic solids, we need an audit on the square root of 2, and we need an audit on action and reaction, or we either got to get rid of, we say 1 times 1 equals 1, and there's no action and reaction. One or the other, you can't have both. And until we make that change, we're in trouble. We're gonna be stunted as a species.
Terrance Howard says we've got it wrong about magnetism and radiation being all bad. They're actually crucial for making new stuff.
I mean, you got to remember, we've been here since the very beginning. Mm-hmm. There is no good or bad. Mm-hmm. It's just your perspective that you're sitting from. Is it beneficial for everyone around, or is it not? There's something that has to build up, and there's something that needs to tear it down. Mm-hmm. What we call the tearing of it down, we call it evil or bad, but that's the process of magnetism or radiation. Radiation tears apart that which was concentrically brought together through electric potential and electric force. Electricity is always seeking a higher pressure condition, trying to get to the center of the apex, whereas magnetism is spinning southwesterly, trying to get out. But the magnetism is necessary because unless it broke apart that which was collected together, you would never have any new material to rebuild again. And that's the breathing in and the breathing out of universal purpose. Now, so at the end of the day, since the Creator made all things, and everything came from the Creator.
Right.
Terrance Howard says science just helps us understand nature, and he thinks calling something bad is all about how you see it.
Well, science is to explain natural phenomena. Okay. The whole point of science was to explain natural phenomena, and it should coincide with what takes place in the observable universe. And that should strengthen one's faith. And that's why I said, as above, so below. So if here everything has an equal and opposite mate, and is necessary in order for the proliferation of life and the continuation of the cycle that is just sleeping, and then you refold again and you're reborn again. There is nothing that is bad except how you are perceiving it, and whether it's beneficial to everyone around you, because something needs to tear things apart. The FDA had 6 different grand juries to try and indict this man. And every time they did that, he had his patients that came in there, patients that were supposed to be dead 25 years ago, that are sitting there with their entire families, saying that I am here as a result of this man's work. But if I had followed my course, my mother would still be here. But again, that's like the time traveler, he developed the time machine so he can go back and get his wife, but it was his wife that led him to build the time machine. So no matter what, he was always going to be repeating that. And I had to recognize that the universe doesn't make any mistakes. My mother was here long enough to do what she needed to do, but her passing reminded me that I had more work to do and that I was not fulfilling my true capacity.
Wow.
And so I stepped out to do what I needed to do, and that's with the world of science.
Yeah.
That's just trying to illuminate and elevate our species so that we can become balanced with the universe. There's 4 levels of species. A level 1 society has complete control over his planet.
Okay.
And the resources, and are able to balance with it. A level 2 society would have complete control over their sun and the solar system. A level 3 society would have complete control of the galaxy and its energy and able to work with it. And level 4 society, civilization would have complete control over the universe and know how to work within it. Well, that's not possible when you have imaginary straight lines in a world, in the universe, where if all energy in the universe is expressed in motion, and all motion is expressed in waves, and all waves are curved. So it's like, where did they get the straight lines to make the Platonic solids? If every action in the universe has an equal and opposite reaction, which we know it does, and therefore the greater the action, the greater the reaction, the greater the reaction, the greater the resistance, the greater the resistance, the greater the curvature. Therefore, everything has curvature. So where did they get the straight lines to make the Platonic solids? When I was examining the human body and, the digits of fingers, they have the same nerves that run into our teeth. The same exact nerves. Our teeth would be fingers. They're an example. That's why you don't go and let them take your teeth out to put somebody else's pretend smile on you. But also with the human mind, over 60% of our mind is geared towards our digits, our hands. So if you're only writing with one hand, you're losing half of your brain's potential. And if our legs behave the way our hands behave, where only one leg was dominant, then we would be crippled. And so I started writing when I was a teenager. I started writing backwards first I started writing with my left hand. Then I was like, why am I only writing in one direction? And what I found when I switched from a right hand to my left hand, that it was a different personality. It was a different kind of writing. It was like my brain had reversed itself. But then when I started writing backwards, it polarized.
And I was able to understand a lot of this stuff. And so I dug real deep into it, and I got to the understanding that we're living in a multi-dimensional universe, and there's at least 11 dimensions. Otherwise, the universe would collapse. So we know that the universe is most likely the shadow of a higher dimension. It's crazy stuff. If I took all 8 billion humans and removed the empty space between their atoms, I can fit every human into a sugar cube. One sugar cube can hold all 8 billion of us.
Exploring the concept of higher dimensions, we delve into the distinction between 1, 2, and 3-dimensional existence.
So if you draw a line on a piece of paper, that's the first dimension. If you then connect those lines and create a house on a piece of paper, that's a 2-dimensional structure, or you can move it into a computer. Anything you see in a computer that looks 3D is actually 2D, right? So, and because we're in the third, we can see down into 2D, we can see all the way down, obviously, into 1D, and we can manipulate those dimensions from our higher selves.
Multidimensional beings, adept at navigating different frequencies, may coexist alongside us, hidden from our perception.
I think we have under the ocean that there's people living here that have been here for a very long time. I believe that they have their own breakaway civilization. The oceans are pretty much mostly undisturbed, and they're there. I think you also have multidimensionals, beings that are in higher dimensions or other dimensions that know how to match their subatomic frequency to our particular dimension, and they can walk right in or fly right in or come right in some type of way.
Now, now there are beings in 4th, 5th, and 6th dimensions. There's people above us. Now, because of that, they see us and they recognize the past, present, and future operating all at the same time. Everything's happening at once.
Right.
There is no separation between the past, present, and the future. The arrow doesn't exist. because they're higher than us, they can look down into the third and they can see into what we're doing.
Billy Carson proposes the existence of entities capable of interdimensional travel, utilizing advanced technologies akin to warp drives.
And then also, I believe that you have beings that are light years away that can travel here. And I don't think that they're using typical space travel. They're probably using something like a warp drive, where in a warp drive, what really happens is you actually shrink space in front of the ship and you expand it from the back.
Well, people in the third dimension, we're in the third dimension, what we tend to not understand is that time really doesn't exist. Clocks exist. Time doesn't exist.
Right.
And like you said, we've been given this functional arrow of time, which puts us in one specific direction so that we can organize our thoughts and our days and our years and weeks and what we're going to do and where we're going to meet up with somebody and everything else. So we have this ability to coordinate and collaborate with each other, like how we're here today at this specific time. However, if you understand that time is also an illusion, it's something that you can use as a tool, but if you also understand that it's an illusion, then you can actually master time and you can maximize what you're doing on this planet.
Carson speculates on the existence of 11 dimensions, stacked upon each other, with higher dimensions observing those below.
And I was able to understand a lot of this stuff. And so I dug real deep into it, and I got to the understanding that we're living in a multi-dimensional universe, and there's at least 11 dimensions, otherwise the universe would collapse. Each dimension is a 90-degree angle right above the next one, compactified. So they're sitting right on top of us. So within less than a Planck unit of space above you, there's another dimension that actually exists with a whole nother universe happening simultaneously while we're sitting right here.
The fourth dimension is something called a tesseract. And if you go into the ancient text, it's Metatron's cube. Meta, M-E-T-A, meta. Obviously, you know,
meta.
The metaverse, right? They got that from Metatron's cube. It's a fourth dimensional substructure. Now, this fourth dimension is really something called a quasi-crystal. And this quasi-crystal in the fourth dimension, it casts a shadow. And the shadow that it casts, it creates the realm that we're living in here. We're living in a shadow of a higher dimension. That shadow creates the third dimension. It actually creates a fractal of it, creates this fractal holographic matrix that we're actually maneuvering in the third dimension right now.
From the vantage point of higher dimensions, time transcends linear progression, existing as an interconnected tapestry of past, present, and future.
And from higher dimensions, they experience time differently. Time really doesn't exist. The past, present, and the future happen all at once. So somebody, for example, from the fifth dimension would look at us and they'd be able to see us. Imagine us in this building here, but imagine when I first walked in, and imagine us in here, and imagine me like in the bathroom or something. They'd be able to see us in all the different rooms. The different rooms represent different time frames of existence within this structure. So they can see the past, present, and future at the same time. So it's pretty cool. Weird stuff starts happening the higher the dimensions you go.
You can address a fourth dimension of time like Albert Einstein was saying if you're just looking at a third plus a fourth being the arrow. But when you actually move up into another dimension, we now know in quantum physics that there is actually a fourth dimension. So all dimensions are in 90-degree angles of each other. And according to quantum theory right now, we're really anticipating that there's at least 11 dimensions, or otherwise the universe would collapse. So there really is truly a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way up. Not just the arrow of time, that's just something extra. They try to make it make sense back then by saying the fourth dimension is time, but time is actually not a dimension at all.
In the vast emptiness of atomic structure lies the revelation that our reality is but a manifestation of slowed down light waves, illuminating the ephemeral nature of existence.
So is the idea that when you're in a higher dimension, you can see below lower dimensions, but you can't see dimensions above you?
Exactly, unless you have the capability of matching. First, you have to obtain the frequency of a higher dimension and then match that frequency to be able to walk in. So
match the frequency.
Yeah, so for example, okay, my hand is stopped now by this table, right? Why is it stopped? I'm not really touching the table. There's repulsion going on. Electromagnetic repulsion between the electrons in my hand is repelling the electrons in the table. You don't really touch anything. Now, if I can match the subatomic frequency of the atoms in this chunk of wood here on this table, I could, with my hand, I would be able to pass my hand right through this table unscathed. Why? Because atoms are 99.999% empty space. Nothing is really here. Everything is only a light wave slowed down to a particular frequency. And so if you can match frequencies, you can merge with things. You can walk through walls and all that kind of stuff. The things that seem paranormal could be advanced beings have tapped into some type of understanding of how to match different frequencies in our dimension and appear apparitional or paranormal, but in true reality, they could just be taking a peek in.
I believe personally, just based off of my research, and I've gone through now over 1,000 scriptures, texts, papyruses, cuneiform tablets from all over the world. They all have a very similar story. And all these ancient civilizations talk about beings, not just beings who came here from other planets, people that look like us and we look like them. In other words, not identical, but very similar. In other words, a bilateral, bipedal hominid of some type that can maneuver around, that has appendages that can manipulate the environment, because without that, you can't move out into space and other places. And they also talk about multidimensional. You get into like the Nag Hammadi, stuff like that, talking about multidimensional beings. And so in physics, in quantum physics in particular, they started theorizing on these dimensions and were able to even analyze and discover some that they actually do exist. And on top of that, they realized that the dimensions are packed so tight on top of one another that if you can phase shift your atomic structure, your subatomic frequency, you can walk right into another dimension. And so they started postulating, what if beings from higher dimensions or some of these apparitions and these paranormal phenomena that we're seeing, are they able to maybe take a glimpse or a peek? Are they phasing through into our universe? And so from higher dimensions. And so they started really theorizing it. It seems to be, and based on my research, that there's people living everywhere. Not just, and I'm not talking about little green men with antenna. I think that there's people living all throughout this universe in the third dimension. And I think there's people living all throughout even higher multiple dimensions, maybe at a certain level, a certain height in those dimensions. Maybe they don't have a real corporeal body.
Right, non-physical.
Non-physical, you know what I'm saying? But I believe that the consciousness is there.
Quantum physics proves it. See, when we look into the quantum world, everything changed. In standard physics is where we are right now, in the large side of physics. But the smaller you go, the more weird things get. We find that particles transphase in and out of existence, and they go to different dimensions. We even know now that some of our synapses of our thoughts in our brain phase out of this dimension and they go somewhere else, and then they come back again. And this has all been tracked and traced through the understanding of quantum mechanics and quantum physics, and understanding that dimensions exist. The biggest way that we made a model of this is we figured out how to create something called quasi-crystals. Now, these quasi-crystals are these multi-dimensional crystals. We actually created an 8th dimensional quasi-crystal.
We created this.
Yes, we created.
How did we create it?
We created in a laboratory using different technologies. And then from that 8th dimensional quasi-crystal, it casts a shadow of itself down to a 4th dimensional quasi-crystal, which then casts down a shadow which creates a sphere. So we know that the universe is most likely the shadow of a higher dimension. It's crazy stuff.
Well, one thing people don't understand is that we are all made of actual light. Well, everything in the third dimension is made of light. And so we are light and light is us. We know that the illusion of this avatar body and this chair I'm sitting on and the table that you're sitting at, the illusion of it's there. But what is this? This is slowed down light waves. When you slow light down and then consciousness interacts with it, it collapses it into what we call solid matter. So solid matter is actually an illusion.
Right.
For example, the only thing stopping my hand from going through this chair is the repulsion of the electromagnetic frequencies. I don't actually touch the chair. You don't touch anything.
Yeah.
And so if I can phase shift the atomic frequency of my hand to match the same frequency of the atoms in this chair, I pass my hand right through it because atoms are 99.999% empty space.
Right, like pouring liquid into liquid.
Exactly, you know? That's why when galaxies merge together, like we're merging with a galaxy right now called Sagittarius, you don't see any real collisions happening or anything around us.
Shout out to my Sagittarius out there.
Yeah, because, you know, galaxies are mostly empty space, just like atoms. Everything's a fractal. So We are light beings, and also because of that, we're a fractal. We have consciousness, which is also light. And
What is a fractal?
A fractal is when you take, for example, if you look at a hologram, and you go to one part of the hologram, one tiny piece, and look at it, you'll see the entire image in that smallest piece. The only thing you lose is a little bit of resolution, okay? And so it's important for people to understand that this entire realm is a fractal of a whole. In other words, as above, so below.
So if you look at an atom, it gives you the whole thing.
It gives you the whole thing, absolutely.
So human beings, would you consider a fractal of the universe?
We're a fractal of the universe, and our consciousness, even though it's one consciousness, it's also a fractal of the main master consciousness. And it's really incredible that every thought that you think in your skull, it leaves your skull as a form of a light wave.
So Professor James Gates Jr., University of Maryland, former scientific advisor to President Obama, just to give you, like, this guy, he's not just like a jackpot or something. He's like a real dude, you know?
Yeah.
And he put together a team of the most incredible supersymmetry and theoretical physicists in the world, like the top brains in the world on this. And they started analyzing what is the ether of space-time. What is this soup that we're living in, that we're inhabiting, this universe? What is it? What is it made of? What's powering it? They discovered something called Adinkra codes, which go back to the ancient Dogon tribe from Mali, Africa. The original inhabitants of the land of Cam then moved to Mali later after they were thrown out while taken over at one point. But they still kept this ancient knowledge in Mali about these Adinkra codes, and they would draw these patterns. Well, he discovered that these patterns are actually mathematical codes. And these are not just any mathematical code. There goes one there. They're actually the codes that describe the ether of space-time itself. They're error-correcting codes, the same exact codes that run our search engines and web browsers that we're using right now to look at the image. There's coding behind that screen that runs this, what we just did. And guess what? It's the same code that runs the universe. So we discovered that we're living in a programmed light matrix. There's a software programmer that has written this code. These are depicting the nature of reality.
Wow.
And they actually are mathematical programming codes. They're a special type of code, though. They're error-correcting codes. The same type that Google browser is running on is the same thing that runs the universe.
Error-correcting codes.
Yeah.
And what do we gain from all of this knowledge? Like, what does this tell us, and where do we take this? Like, what is obviously this is like foundational knowledge for us, but like, where do you see it going?
Well, if you understand that we're living in a fractal holographic light matrix, it doesn't mean we're not real. It just means that there is a creator or creators, that we're living in something that was created, just like the ancient texts and all the scribes and biblical texts and everything else says. But it tells us, wow, this is the method of the creation. Now we're getting closer to understanding what we really are. We understand now that consciousness isn't made inside this avatar body, that the avatar body doesn't even exist, that consciousness is a stream of something, coming from somewhere else, and is being picked up in this matrix with this coding. If you took all the humans on Earth, there's 8 billion humans on Earth. If I took all 8 billion humans and removed the empty space between their atoms, I can fit every human into a sugar cube. One sugar cube can hold all 8 billion of us.